Good morning and peace to you. It is so good to come before you and celebrate the fact that this is a day that God has prepared for us to share. Therefore, let us rejoice and always be glad in it. Today's a little bit different. I'm coming before you within our living room in the Thomas, and I'm joined with my wonderful, beautiful wife, Kawami.
Good morning, everyone.
I'm hoping that all of you will be able to watch the live stream conference worship service at 10:30. Most of you have received the link in your email, or you can go, of course, directly to the Cal Nevada website. I am overjoyed to be a part of this service in which I will be commissioned. Because of this video will not be too long. I wanted to share with you my reflections on Jesus that I recorded last week for the St. Mark's series, and then close with a brief prayer. But first,
Yes, but first, again, I want to say hello and good morning to you all again. It is indeed my pleasure to be here with you. The opportunity to be here reminds me of a poem by Mary Oliver. And the first part of this poem goes something like this. Still, what I want in my life is to be willing to be dazzled, to cast aside the weight of facts, and maybe even to float a little above this difficult world. I like this poem because it reminds me of my morning rituals and meditations that we have as a family. Before the busyness of the day starts, before work and before Niara gets ready to go to school, we like to ground ourselves in prayer. And we do this to remind ourselves of truth with a capital T, to be reminded about the ever present qualities of love and grace that are always available and around us. And when we start our day with these types of knowings, we can walk with gratitude and delightful anticipation of all the beauty that the day holds.
yeah, indeed, and actually, we had Niara out here earlier, and we were talking about this verse that we read in Colossians, and it goes something about as God's beloved people, we should clothe ourselves. It's beautiful, this language of clothing ourselves with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. And I remember Niara saying it's almost as if at the same way we put on clothes, we have to put on love. So indeed, remembering these things allows us to have a good morning. As the first thing we do is try to put on love and all those things that help us move into a place of gratitude and anticipation and groundedness in truth. This love thing is a message that Jesus embodied, a message that has led and continues to lead millions of people to make the vision of the beloved community, a place that is characterized by justice and joy, a bit more real for all people. So let us go into that brief video that I produced, but first let us hear the song Morning Has Broken.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from
You know, when Pastor Allen asked me to briefly speak on my perceptions of Jesus, I quickly said yes, because here at First United Methodist Church at Roseville, we are exploring similar themes throughout this season. I didn't know just how challenging it would be to sum up my thoughts in just a few moments, but here we go. And so the claims about Jesus can be placed on a continuum of a high Christology, which emphasizes the divinity of Christ, and a lower Christology, which centers on the humanity of Jesus. Within the African American experience, Jesus was often seen as that representation of God's bodily and present help that walked with us in times of struggle. We identify with the person of Jesus, that young Jewish man from Palestine who lived in an occupied state, who lived in poverty, who lived a life that was threatened, and who was ultimately killed by state violence. Jesus, the one who was found among and ministered to the least of these in societies, those whose back were up against the wall, those whose society either oppressed or those whose lives were deemed expendable or not mattered. And as Cone argued, if Jesus were to be found today, then he would necessarily be found in and centered around the Black experience. Or as the Catholics say, God has a preferential option for the poor. Or as I would say, Jesus is found within those who still have to assert that their lives matter and still get pushback. And so now here in 2020, as the events of this year seems to just pile on, I've been turning more and more to Black women theologians like Katie Cannon and Jacqueline Grant, who guide us to not only look at racism, but how it interacts with other structural realities such as classism and sexism and patriarchy and later heterosexism. As such, womanist theology is centered on seeing the person and work of Jesus through the lens of the lived experiences of Black women who stand at these intersections of multiple oppressions and identities. Simply, it is seeing Jesus through the lens of my wife, Kawami, or my daughter, Niara. These womanist theologians were able to push back on certain problematic notions like making surrogacy a sign of virtue, which toxically outpictures as presenting long suffering and burden bearing and the acceptance of oppression as a sign of being a good Christian. No. Womanist theologians say that Jesus, who lived a life contextualized by suffering and pain, does not valorize it, but resist it. And Jesus does this not only by accompanying those who are suffering, but by empowering people to struggle against those systems that cause the suffering in the first place. And so the spirit of the first century Jesus movement in Palestine lives on in those who are in the streets fighting for justice now. It lives in the breath of the massive protests sparked by the killing of George Floyd, whose own breath was taken from him by state violence. It lives in the spirit of the frontline workers who have dedicated their lives to saving the lives of other folk despite the deadly perils of a pervasive pandemic. And it lives in seeing God in your neighbor and loving them through action and advocacy despite the danger. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is called to the protest line. Everyone must find their own lane. It does mean that you have to find ways to honor Jesus by attending to a ministry that is for and to and with those who are the least of these, those who need to assert that their lives matter. And as Raquel St. Clair said, to take up our cross in discipleship means to follow Jesus in a ministry that is life-affirming, God-glorifying, and agony-eradicating. Discipleship means, as Monica Coleman says, participating in a community committed to salvific acts for the redemption of the whole, and that salvation is the insurrectionary and revolutionary process of challenging the status quo. Now, this is a different perspective for those who primarily see Jesus as a divine Christ whose main mission and purpose was to enable a personal salvation and an access pass to heaven. A womanist framework about Jesus affirms that the spirituality of the personal is fulfilled in the socio-political realities of enfleshed beings and communities on earth. Jesus embodies the maxim that the personal is political, especially when viewed from the position of the powerless instead of the privileged powerful. So, here in 2020, in our society, for our communities and for our churches, Jesus, while informed by the lenses I previously discussed, invites us into a life of radical solidarity and neighborliness, a discipleship that stands with and for those in society whose lives are relegated to matterlessness. It looks like confronting systems of oppression, voting our values, and holding leaders accountable. And it also looks like making good trouble, like John Lewis did, like Jesus did, like Harriet Tubman, or Fannie Lou Hamer, or Mary McLeod Bethune, or Ida B. Wells, or Betty Shabazz, or Michelle Obama, or Bree Newsom, or Larisha Hawkins, or Patrice Cullors, or Alicia Garza. In this way, the view of Jesus empowers us to truly make real the beloved community on earth. And in this year, 2020, a year characterized by pandemics and politics, that Jesus, I believe, is needed more than ever before. Blessings to you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We pray that you may remember the words that are found in the book of Lamentations
that says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. God's mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning." And as the song says, new every morning. Great is God's faithfulness. May you have the experience of that truth today. And may you just have a good morning. And now may you go with God. And may you go in God's peace. Bye.
Bye.
God be with you.